I was pressing my best shirt when Lisa walked into the kitchen. The wedding invitation lay on the table next to me, cream-colored paper with golden edges. My son's name printed in elegant script, "Michael and Sarah request your presence." I'd been looking forward to this day for months. Bought a new tie, had my shoes polished, even practiced walking without my cane, though my knee still ached from the old injury. "Dad, we need to talk." Lisa sat down across from me, her fingers drumming nervously on the wooden table. "About tomorrow." I looked up from the iron. She had that expression, the one she'd worn as a child when she'd broken something and was trying to figure out how to explain it. "What about tomorrow?" She cleared her throat. "Michael and we've been discussing this. We think it might be better if you didn't come to the wedding." The iron stopped moving in my hand. The steam hissed quietly between us. "I see." I set the iron down carefully. "Why?" Her cheeks flushed pink. "It's just, you know how these things are. Sarah's family is very sophisticated. Her father owns 3 restaurants. Her mother speaks French." I nodded slowly, waiting. "And you're—" She gestured vaguely at my work shirts hanging on the back of a chair. "You worked at the factory for 40 years. You tell those stories about your army days. You eat with your hands sometimes." "I see." "It's not that we're ashamed of you," she said quickly. "It's just that Sarah's friends will be there. Important people. Business contacts. We can't afford to— You understand, right?" I looked at the invitation again. "Your presence is requested." "Dad, please don't make this harder than it is." I unplugged the iron and hung the shirt back in the closet. The hangers clinked softly against each other. When I turned around, Lisa was still sitting there, watching me with guilty eyes. "Who's walking Sarah down the aisle?" I asked. "Her stepfather, Robert. He's a lawyer." "And who's giving the father's speech?" She looked down at her hands. Robert offered to do both. I sat back down at the table, my fingers tracing the edge of the invitation. 43 years ago, I'd carried Lisa to the hospital when she broke her arm. 20 years ago, I'd taught Michael how to drive in this same driveway. Last Christmas, they'd both hugged me and said I was the best father they could ask for. "Dad, you understand, right?" I folded the invitation carefully and placed it in my shirt pocket. "I understand perfectly." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I knew you'd get it. You always do." After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The house felt different now, smaller. Outside, I could hear the neighbors getting ready for their own Saturday plans. Normal families doing normal things. I took the invitation out of my pocket and read it again. "Your presence is requested." Then I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello, Tom? It's Frank." "Yes, I know it's been a while. Listen, are you still in town? My son's getting married tomorrow, and I think it's time you met him." The next morning, I stood by the window watching Lisa's car pull up with boxes of flowers for the reception. Michael had been up since dawn, adjusting his tie in the mirror for the 10th time. Sarah practiced her walk down an imaginary aisle in the living room. The house hummed with excitement. Everyone had a role to play, everyone except me. I moved through the rooms like a ghost. When I entered the kitchen, conversation stopped. When I offered to help carry something, hands waved me away. "We've got it, Dad." Always polite, always dismissive. At breakfast, they discussed the seating arrangement without looking at me. So Robert will sit where Dad usually sits? Yes, right next to Aunt Helen. She loves talking about legal cases. They spoke about me in third person while I buttered my toast 3 feet away. Sarah's mother called to confirm final details. Will the father of the groom be giving a speech? Lisa glanced at me briefly. No, Robert will handle both speeches. He's much better with crowds. I set my coffee cup down too hard. It rattled against the saucer. No one noticed. Later, I found my favorite mug broken in the sink. The one Mary had given me for our anniversary, white porcelain with tiny blue flowers. 30 years I'd drunk my morning coffee from that cup. Oh, that old thing? Lisa said when she saw me holding the pieces. I think the cleaning lady knocked it over. Don't worry about it, Dad. We'll get you a new one. But they wouldn't, and we both knew it. I swept up the fragments myself, each piece cutting a little deeper than it should have. The afternoon brought more visitors. Sarah's college friends, Michael's co-workers, relatives I hadn't seen in years. They filled the house with laughter and champagne toasts. I sat in my chair by the bookshelf, watching it all happen around me. Occasionally, someone would nod in my direction. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." But the conversations flowed past me like water around a stone. At 4 o'clock, I heard Lisa on the phone with the photographer. "No, don't worry about family portraits with the bride's father. He won't be at the ceremony." My chest tightened. 43 years of raising her, and I'd been edited out of the story. Michael found me in the garage later, organizing tools I'd already organized twice. "Dad, about tomorrow." "I know," I said without looking up. Lisa explained. "It's just Sarah's family has certain expectations. Her father went to Harvard. Her stepfather argues cases in front of the Supreme Court." I nodded. "And I fixed airplane engines." "It's not about better or worse," he said quickly. "It's about fitting in." I looked at my hands, scarred from 40 years of honest work, steady enough to rebuild an engine, gentle enough to teach him how to ride a bike. "I understand, son." That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The wedding invitation lay in front of me, edges worn from handling. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, my son would marry the woman he loved. I would not be there, but someone else would be. I reached for the phone and dialed the number again. "Tom? It's Frank. About tomorrow. Bring your uniform. The dress blues. And Tom, bring the box we talked about, the one from Korea." The house settled into silence around me. Tomorrow would change everything. They thought they knew who I was. They were about to learn otherwise. The evening before the wedding, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust motes danced in the fading light from the single bulb. Behind Christmas decorations and old furniture, I found what I was looking for, a military footlocker I hadn't opened in 20 years. The metal hinges protested as I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, lay my dress uniform. The fabric was darker than I remembered, the brass buttons tarnished with age, but beneath the uniform, in a small wooden box, were the things that mattered. The silver star, the purple heart, citations I'd never shown my children. My fingers traced the edges of a faded photograph. My unit in Korea, 1951. 12 young men grinning at the camera. Only 4 of us made it home. Tom was one of them. At the bottom of the box, I found the letter, written on Red Cross stationery in Tom's careful handwriting. Frank, I owe you my life, not just from that day at Heartbreak Ridge, but every day since. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me. That's not a request. That's an order from your old sergeant. I'd saved Tom's life during a Chinese counterattack, dragged him 2 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in my shoulder. The Army gave me medals for it, but I never told anyone the details. What was the point? Heroes were for movies. I was just a factory worker who'd done his job. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Downstairs, I could hear Lisa on the phone with the caterer, making last-minute changes. Michael was in the living room, nervously practicing his vows. The house thrummed with pre-wedding energy. I carried the photograph downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. 12 young faces looked back at me, boys who'd become men in the span of a heartbeat, boys who'd trusted me to bring them home. Dad? Lisa appeared in the doorway holding her phone. What's that? Old friends, I said simply. She glanced at the photograph, her eyes scanning the uniformed faces. For a moment, I thought she might ask about the war, about what I'd done there, about why I'd never talked about it. Instead, she said, "You should put that away before tomorrow. Sarah's family might think it's too much, like everything else about me." After she left, I sat alone with the photograph. Tom would be arriving tomorrow morning. We'd planned it carefully. He'd wear his colonel's uniform, the same rank he'd earned after Korea. He'd bring the decorations I'd earned but never displayed. The phone rang. Tom's voice was steady, professional. "Frank, I'm at the hotel. Everything's ready on my end. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure." "Your kids have no idea what you did over there?" "None." A long pause. "That's about to change." After I hung up, I walked through the house one last time. Michael's graduation photos on the mantel. Summa cum laude from college, law school acceptance letter, his first job at the firm. Lisa's achievements lined the hallway. Her teaching awards, her master's degree, the article she'd published about gifted children. My children had built successful lives. They'd risen above their blue-collar origins, joined a world I'd never been part of, a world where factory workers didn't belong at elegant weddings. But they'd forgotten something important. They'd forgotten that their success was built on the foundation I'd laid, every scholarship application I'd helped them fill out, every late-night study session I'd supervised, every sacrifice I'd made so they could reach higher than I ever had. They'd forgotten who taught them that honor mattered more than appearances. I returned to the kitchen and picked up the photograph one last time. Tom was in the back row, third from the left. Even then, he'd had the bearing of a leader. After the war, he'd used the GI Bill to become a lawyer, then a judge. He'd married a senator's daughter, moved in circles where people knew the right forks to use at dinner. But he'd never forgotten that night at Heartbreak Ridge, never forgotten the factory worker who'd carried him to safety. Tomorrow, he'd remind my children of something they'd chosen to forget, that the measure of a man wasn't found in his bank account or his vocabulary. It was found in the moments when everything else fell away and only character remained. I closed the photograph in my Bible and placed it on my bedside table. In 18 hours, Michael would marry Sarah. Robert would walk her down the aisle. Robert would give the father's toast. Robert would dance the traditional dance with the bride. I wouldn't be there, but the man who'd saved Tom's life would be. The soldier who'd earned medals he'd never displayed would be. The father who'd sacrificed everything for his children would finally be seen for who he really was. The wedding would go on without me, but my story, our story, would finally be told. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow would change everything. They thought they knew me. They thought they could erase me from their perfect day. They were about to learn that some men can't be erased. They were about to learn who their father really was. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunlight that made everything look like a wedding magazine photo. I watched from my bedroom window as the florists arrived, then the caterers, then the photographer with enough equipment to film a movie. By noon, the house had transformed into something I barely recognized. White silk ribbons draped the staircase. Flowers filled every corner. Strangers in expensive suits moved through rooms where I'd raised my children, treating the space like a stage set. I stayed upstairs, out of the way. Occasionally, I heard Lisa's voice directing traffic. The bridal suite is the master bedroom. Father of the bride preparations are in the study. We'll need a quiet space for Robert to practice his speech. Robert, the man who would stand where I should stand, who would speak the words I should speak. At 1:30, I put on my best civilian clothes, a navy suit I'd worn to graduation ceremonies and parent-teacher conferences. I looked at myself in the mirror, respectable, forgettable, exactly what my children expected. The doorbell rang downstairs. Through my window, I saw a black sedan in the driveway. Government plates. Tom had arrived. I waited. Let Lisa answer the door. Let her try to explain to this distinguished stranger why her father wasn't welcome at his own son's wedding. "Dad," Lisa's voice called up the stairs, uncertain now. "There's someone here to see you." I took my time walking down. Tom stood in the foyer wearing his full dress uniform, colonel's eagles gleaming on his shoulders, service ribbons creating a rainbow of honor across his chest. At 68, he still carried himself like the soldier he'd been, still commanded respect without saying a word. Lisa stared at him with obvious confusion. Michael had stopped mid-conversation with a groomsman. Sarah's mother, elegant in her designer dress, looked like she'd stumbled into the wrong movie. "Colonel Morrison," I said formally, extending my hand. "Frank." His grip was firm. "Thank you for inviting me to your son's wedding." The room went silent. Lisa's mouth opened slightly. Michael stepped forward, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "I'm sorry. There's been some confusion," Michael said politely. "This is a private family ceremony." Tom's gaze shifted to my son, military bearing, measuring the man in front of him. "You must be Michael. Your father's told me so much about you." "I don't understand," Lisa said. "Dad, who is this?" Before I could answer, Tom reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather folder. "My apologies for arriving unannounced. I was Colonel Morrison, Judge Morrison now. Your father saved my life in Korea. When he called to tell me about the wedding, I couldn't miss the chance to finally meet his family." The folder opened to reveal photographs, citations, official documents. Tom spread them on the entry table like evidence in a court case. "This is your father at 19, he said, pointing to a black and white photo of a young soldier. "Youngest sergeant in our company. Led 7 rescue missions behind enemy lines." Sarah's stepfather, Robert, moved closer to examine the documents. His face was grave, professional. "These are bronze stars, silver star, purple heart with oak leaf cluster." 2 purple hearts, Tom corrected. He was wounded twice. Refused medical evacuation both times because his men needed him. Lisa picked up one of the photographs. Her hands trembled slightly. "Dad, this is you?" I nodded, but said nothing. What was there to say? That I'd been young once? That I'd done things I'd never talked about? That the man they thought they knew was only part of the story? Tom continued his presentation with military precision. October 15th, 1951. Chinese forces overran our position at Heartbreak Ridge. Your father crawled through artillery fire to reach my location. I had shrapnel in my leg, couldn't move. Frank carried me 2 miles to safety, took a bullet in the shoulder, but never dropped me. Michael stared at the citation in his hands. "It says here you were recommended for the Medal of Honor." "Politics," Tom said simply. "Wrong war, wrong time. But the men who served with your father know what he did. We've never forgotten." Sarah's mother found her voice. "Mr. Harrison, why didn't you ever mention any of this?" I looked around the room at faces I'd known for decades, seeing strangers staring back at me. What was I supposed to say? That I killed people? That I watched friends die? That I came home and pretended it never happened so I could build a normal life for my children? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Tom closed the folder and handed it to Michael. "Your father called me yesterday. Said his children thought he might embarrass them at the wedding, that a factory worker wasn't sophisticated enough for the occasion." Tom's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. "I thought you should know who you're embarrassed by." Lisa's face flushed red. "We never said embarrassed. We just thought—" "You thought I was simple," I said quietly. "Blue collar, unsophisticated, someone who might use the wrong fork or tell inappropriate stories." "Dad, that's not—" "It's exactly what you said, sweetheart. And you were right. I am simple. I fixed airplanes for 40 years. I tell the same stories about Korea and car engines and teaching you kids to ride bikes. I don't know wine from grape juice, and I've never been to Europe." Tom stepped forward. "But he's also the bravest man I've ever known. He's the reason I live to see my grandchildren. He's the reason 12 other men came home to their families." The doorbell rang again. Through the window, I could see another car in the driveway, then another. Tom had made more calls than I'd realized. "That'll be the others," Tom said calmly. "The men who served with your father, the ones who could make it on short notice." Lisa looked panicked. "Others? How many others?" "Enough," Tom said. "Enough to tell the story properly." The door opened, and they filed in one by one. Old men now, but carrying themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Some in uniform, others in their best civilian clothes, each one stopping to shake my hand, to say words I hadn't heard in decades. "Sarge, Frank, good to see you, old friend." Michael stood frozen in the middle of his own living room, watching his father be greeted by men who clearly revered him. Sarah's family clustered near the staircase, uncertain how to react to this unexpected invasion of their perfect wedding day. Robert, Sarah's stepfather, examined the citations more carefully. As a lawyer, he knew official documents when he saw them. "These are authentic," he murmured to Sarah's mother. "This is serious military recognition." "Why are they here?" Sarah whispered to Michael. Tom overheard. "We're here because Frank asked us to come, because 40 years ago he saved our lives, and we've been waiting for a chance to honor him properly." I felt the weight of their expectation, their loyalty. These men had traveled hundreds of miles on a day's notice because I'd asked them to, because they remembered what my own children had forgotten. "The wedding starts in an hour," Lisa said desperately. "This isn't— we can't." "Can't what?" Tom asked. "Can't honor a war hero at his son's wedding? Can't acknowledge the sacrifices that built the foundation for your success?" One of the other veterans, a man I'd known as Jimmy, but who now wore the insignia of a retired general, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't want to disrupt your celebration. We just wanted to make sure everyone understood who Frank Harrison really is." The room felt smaller suddenly, crowded with history and truth and uncomfortable revelations. My children stood surrounded by evidence of a man they'd never bothered to know. Their father, the factory worker, their father, the war hero, the same person seen clearly for the first time. Michael looked at me with something like awe. "Dad, I had no idea." "You never asked," I said simply. And that was the truth that hung in the air between us. They'd never asked about Korea, never asked why I sometimes woke up at night, never asked why I'd chosen such a simple life after serving my country with distinction. They'd assumed they knew me. They'd been wrong. The wedding would begin soon. Their perfect day would continue as planned. But everything had changed. The man they'd thought would embarrass them had just revealed himself to be someone they'd never imagined. Someone worthy of honor, someone worthy of respect, someone they'd never truly known at all. The veterans arranged themselves naturally around the living room, their presence commanding respect without demanding it. These weren't men who needed to prove their worth. They'd done that decades ago on battlefields whose names most people had forgotten. Sarah's mother, Patricia, recovered her composure first. As a diplomat's wife, she'd learned to adapt to unexpected situations. "Gentlemen, we're honored by your presence. Perhaps you could join us for the reception afterward?" "That's kind of you, ma'am," said Jimmy, General Morrison now. "But we're not here as guests. We're here as witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" Robert asked. He'd moved protectively closer to Sarah, his lawyer instincts sensing a shift in the room's power dynamics. Tom opened his briefcase again, this time withdrawing a thick manila folder. "To the presentation of decorations that should have been awarded 40 years ago. Decorations that were delayed by bureaucracy and forgotten by time, but never forgotten by the men whose lives they represent." I felt my chest tighten. "Tom, what did you do?" "What should have been done in 1951, he replied. "I made some calls, pulled some strings. Sometimes being a federal judge has its advantages." Lisa looked between us, confusion and panic warring on her face. "I don't understand. What's happening here?" "Your father was submitted for the Medal of Honor after Heartbreak Ridge," Tom explained. "The recommendation was downgraded due to political considerations. The Korean conflict wasn't popular. Decorations were being restricted. He received the Silver Star instead." He paused, letting the weight of that injustice settle over the room. Last month, Congress passed a resolution allowing review of Korean War decorations that may have been unfairly downgraded. Your father's case was among the first approved. Michael had gone pale. You're saying Dad earned the Medal of Honor? I'm saying your father saved 37 men that night at Heartbreak Ridge. I'm saying he carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire for 6 hours. I'm saying he held a position against overwhelming odds while the rest of our unit evacuated. Tom's voice carried the weight of lived truth. And I'm saying that next week, the President of the United States was prepared to award him our nation's highest military honor. The room went silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the clock I'd wound every Sunday for 20 years. Was prepared? Sarah asked quietly. Tom looked at me with something like sorrow. Your father called me yesterday morning, said his children were ashamed of him, said he didn't want to be an embarrassment at his son's wedding, so he asked me to cancel the ceremony. The weight of those words hit my children like a physical blow. Lisa sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Michael stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not shame, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The sudden understanding of what he'd almost lost. Dad, Michael's voice cracked slightly, you canceled the Medal of Honor ceremony? I looked around the room at these good men who'd come so far to honor something I'd tried to bury, at my children who were seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time in their lives, at Sarah's family who judged me without ever bothering to know me. I didn't want to complicate your day, I said simply. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, her diplomatic training failing her for once. Robert cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the silence. You see, said another veteran, a man I remembered as Eddie but who now carried himself with the bearing of someone important, we tried to tell Frank that some things are bigger than personal comfort, that some honors belong to more than just the man receiving them. Eddie stepped forward, his weathered hands gentle as he touched the Silver Star citation. This medal represents 37 families who still have fathers, sons, brothers, because Frank Harrison chose to stay behind and hold that ridge. 37 Christmas mornings that happened, 37 wedding days, 37 chances to say, I love you, one more time. Lisa looked up from her hands, mascara streaking her cheeks. 37 people? The Chinese had us surrounded, Tom continued, his voice carrying the cadence of official testimony. Our orders were to fall back to the main line, standard military protocol. Frank was supposed to retreat with the rest of us. He paused, looking directly at Michael. But he'd spotted a patrol of wounded men trapped in a forward position, 12 soldiers who couldn't move fast enough to make the retreat. Frank had a choice. Follow orders and live, or stay behind and probably die. What did he do? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He sent us ahead, said Jimmy. Told us he'd catch up. We knew he was lying. We knew what staying behind meant. I was 22 years old, I said quietly. I had a picture of your mother in my pocket and a promise to come home to her. Leaving those men wasn't an option. Robert's professional composure cracked slightly. You stayed alone against an entire Chinese regiment? Not alone, Eddie said. Frank convinced 6 other men to stay with him. 7 soldiers against maybe 300 enemy troops. They held that position for 14 hours. 14 hours, Tom repeated, in sub-zero temperatures, under constant artillery bombardment. Frank coordinated the defense, treated the wounded, and organized 3 separate evacuation runs to get the injured men to safety. Michael was shaking his head slowly. "Dad, you never said anything all these years." What was I supposed to say? I looked at my son, seeing the little boy who'd asked me to check for monsters under his bed. That I killed people? That I watched friends die in the snow? That I came home with nightmares and decided the best thing I could do was pretend it never happened so I could be a normal father? "But it did happen," Lisa said, her voice stronger now, "and you were extraordinary." I was terrified, I corrected. Every minute of those 14 hours I was terrified. But those men were counting on me. Sarah's stepfather cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you something as a lawyer. When you canceled the Medal of Honor ceremony, did you understand what you were giving up?" Before I could answer, Tom withdrew another document from his folder. The Medal of Honor comes with a lifetime pension, priority medical care at any VA hospital, a guaranteed burial at Arlington National Cemetery. Most importantly, it comes with recognition that can never be taken away. "How much pension?" Patricia asked, her diplomatic training engaging with practical concerns. $1,400 a month, Tom replied, plus cost of living adjustments for life. Lisa gasped. "Dad, you gave up $1,400 a month because you thought we were embarrassed." The room fell silent again. I could see them calculating, not just the money, but the magnitude of what I'd been willing to sacrifice for their comfort. "The money doesn't matter," I said. "What mattered was your happiness." "Our happiness?" Michael's voice rose with incredulous pain. "Dad, do you know what would make us happy? Having a father we could honor instead of hide." Sarah moved closer to me, her wedding dress rustling softly. "Mr. Harrison, may I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "When you decided to stay at Heartbreak Ridge, what went through your mind?" I closed my eyes, remembering. "I thought about your mother-in-law, about how she'd married a boy who promised to come home to her. I thought about the children we wanted to have someday. I thought about whether I could live with myself if I walked away from those wounded men. And I decided that some things are more important than coming home alive. Some things are more important than personal safety." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Like your children's wedding day?" The parallel hung in the air between us. Just as I'd risked everything for wounded strangers in Korea, I'd been willing to sacrifice my highest honor for children who'd made it clear they were ashamed of me. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Frank, I owe you an apology. We all do." "No apologies necessary," I said. "You didn't know." "We should have known," Robert said firmly. "We should have asked. We should have looked beyond the surface and seen the man underneath." Eddie stepped forward again. "There's something else you should understand about your father. After Heartbreak Ridge, he was offered a battlefield commission. Could have stayed in the Army, become an officer, built a military career." "What did he do?" Michael asked. "He came home," Tom said simply, "said he'd done his duty, and now he had other duties, to his wife, to the family he wanted to build." The Army tried to convince him to stay, Jimmy added, offered him fast promotion, choice assignments. Frank turned it all down, said he'd rather fix airplanes and raise children than fight more wars. Lisa looked at me with something like awe. You chose us over a military career? I chose the life I wanted, I said. A quiet life, a normal life, a life where I could forget what I'd seen and focus on building something good. But you never forgot, Sarah said quietly. The nightmares, the way you sometimes stare at nothing, the reason you never talk about Korea. I nodded. Some memories don't fade, but they're my memories to carry. Tom checked his watch. Frank, the ceremony begins in 40 minutes. There's still time to fix this. I looked at my son, seeing not the successful lawyer worried about appearances, but the little boy who'd once told his first-grade class that his daddy was the strongest man in the world. Fix what, son? This is your day, your choice. Michael's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Dad, I want you to walk Sarah down the aisle. Patricia gasped. Michael, that's Robert's role. He's been preparing. Robert's a good man, Michael interrupted, but he's not family, not the family that matters. Robert surprised everyone by nodding. Michael's right. This honor should go to someone who's earned it through sacrifice, not social position. Sarah squeezed Michael's hand. I'd be honored to have a Medal of Honor recipient give me away. I don't have the medal yet, I said quietly. You have something better, said Tom. You have the respect of every man in this room. You have the love of your children, even when they were too foolish to show it properly. He paused, then smiled. And you have this. From his briefcase, Tom withdrew a small velvet box. Inside, nestled in white satin, lay the medal I'd dreamed about as a young soldier, but had learned to live without as an older man. The president couldn't be here today, Tom said, but he authorized me to present this on his behalf. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The words echoed in the sudden silence. These were words I'd heard in movies, read in books, but never imagined would be spoken about me. Lisa stood slowly, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Dad, what have we done? You grew up, I said gently. You built lives I'm proud of. You became people your mother would have loved to see. But we forgot, Michael said. We forgot who taught us to be those people. Patricia stepped forward, her diplomatic composure replaced by genuine emotion. Frank, I need to say something. In diplomatic circles, I've met many decorated veterans, but I've never met one who was willing to give up recognition to avoid upstaging his children. That level of selflessness is extraordinary. I looked around the room one more time, at the veterans who'd traveled so far to honor our shared history, at my children who'd finally seen past their own embarrassment to recognize their father's worth, at Sarah's family, who were witnessing something they'd probably never forget. There's nothing to forget, I said, and everything to remember. Tom held out the medal. Frank, will you accept this honor? I looked at it, the blue ribbon, the bronze star, the weight of recognition I'd carried without knowing it for 70 years. Then I looked at my son. Will you help me put it on? I asked. Michael's hand shook as he lifted the ribbon over my head. The medal settled against my chest with surprising weight. Not just bronze and fabric, but the accumulated gratitude of men who'd lived because I'd chosen to act when action was needed. "Now," Sarah said, her voice strong despite her tears, "let's have a wedding. And this time, let's make sure everyone knows exactly who's giving the bride away." The room erupted in quiet applause, not the performative clapping of social obligation, but the genuine recognition of a moment that had changed everything. As the veterans filed out to take their places at the ceremony, each man stopped to shake my hand one final time. Words weren't necessary. We'd said everything that needed saying 40 years ago, in a place where words were luxuries we couldn't afford. Lisa helped me adjust my tie, her fingers gentle against the ribbon of the medal. "Dad, can you forgive us?" "There's nothing to forgive," I said, "only everything to be proud of." In 30 minutes, I would walk Sarah down the aisle in front of a congregation that would see me clearly for the first time. Not as the simple factory worker who might embarrass them, but as the man who'd earned the right to be there, the man who'd always been worthy of their respect, the man who'd finally received it. The church filled quickly. Word had spread through the small community about the unexpected turn of events at the Harrison wedding. Guests who had arrived expecting a routine ceremony now whispered among themselves about the Medal of Honor recipient who would be walking the bride down the aisle. I stood in the vestibule, adjusting my tie one final time. The medal felt heavier than it should have, not from its physical weight, but from everything it represented. 40 years of silence, broken in a single afternoon. Sarah appeared beside me, radiant in her white dress, her arms slipping through mine with surprising familiarity. "Mr. Harrison, are you ready for this?" I looked down at her, this young woman who had shown more wisdom in one afternoon than some people managed in a lifetime. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" "There's still time to change your mind. Robert's waiting in the wings." She smiled, the same expression I'd seen her wear when she'd first told us she loved Michael. Confident, determined, unshakable. "I've never been more sure of anything. You're giving me to a man you raised to have integrity and courage. That makes you the only person who should perform this honor." Through the church doors, I could see the assembled congregation, more people than expected, neighbors, co-workers, friends of the family. But scattered throughout the crowd were faces I recognized from another lifetime. Veterans who had somehow learned about the ceremony and made their way here. Old men in their finest clothes, some wearing service medals, others carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of former soldiers. Tom appeared at my elbow, resplendent in his dress uniform. "Frank, there's something you should know. Word got out about the Medal of Honor presentation. There are some reporters outside." My stomach tightened. Reporters? The Legion of Honor put out a press release. First Medal of Honor awarded to a Korean War veteran in 15 years. They want to interview you after the ceremony. Sarah squeezed my arm. "Dad, may I call you Dad? You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. This is Michael's day and yours, no one else's." The music began. The familiar strains of Canon in D filled the church, and suddenly it was time. Sarah adjusted her veil one final time, then looked up at me with eyes bright with excitement and joy. "Remember," she whispered, "walk slowly. This is the only time I'll ever do this, and I want to savor every step." We stepped into the sanctuary together. The congregation rose as one. But something was different from other weddings I'd attended. Usually, all eyes focused on the bride. Today, I felt the weight of their attention on both of us, on Sarah's radiant beauty, but also on the metal gleaming against my chest. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed Mrs. Chen from the grocery store dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Behind her, my old supervisor from the aircraft factory, Joe Martinez, stood at attention with military precision. Near the back, I spotted several men in veterans' caps, strangers who had somehow learned about the ceremony and come to witness something they understood better than most. Michael waited at the altar, his face a mixture of pride, joy, and something else. Respect, maybe, or the kind of awe reserved for seeing someone familiar in an entirely new light. His best man, his college roommate David, whispered something in his ear, but Michael's eyes never left us as we approached. Pastor Williams stood ready to perform the ceremony, but his usual formal demeanor had been replaced by something warmer, more personal. He'd known our family for 20 years, had baptized Michael, had spoken at Mary's funeral. Now he looked at me with the expression of a man witnessing a story he'd only heard in pieces, finally coming together. As we reached the front of the church, Sarah turned to face me. The photographer captured the moment. The bride in her flowing dress, the elderly man in his best suit, with the nation's highest military honor against his chest. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Pastor Williams asked, his voice carrying clearly through the silent sanctuary. The traditional response was simple: "I do." But Sarah had requested something different. She'd asked me to speak from the heart. I looked out at the congregation, friends, family, strangers, united by this moment. Then I looked at Michael, my son, the boy I'd raised to be a man of character. "I do," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "But more than that, I'm proud to." Sarah kissed my cheek, then whispered something only I could hear. "Thank you for showing me what kind of man my husband really is." I placed her hand in Michael's, feeling the symbolic weight of the gesture. For 28 years, she had been someone else's daughter. Now, she was becoming part of our family, choosing to join herself to the son of a man she'd learned to respect. As I stepped back to take my seat in the front pew, I caught sight of Lisa dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She reached for my hand as I sat down, squeezing it gently. No words were necessary. We'd said everything that needed saying back at the house. The ceremony proceeded with traditional beauty. Michael and Sarah exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to honor each other with the same integrity they'd witnessed that afternoon. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared seemed to seal not just their union, but the healing of something that had been broken in our family. During the recessional, as the happy couple walked back down the aisle, Michael paused beside my pew. In front of the entire congregation, my son, successful lawyer, respected member of the community, leaned down and embraced me. "I love you, Dad," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm sorry it took me so long to say that properly. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with the same attention to detail that had characterized every aspect of the wedding, but the atmosphere was different from what anyone had expected. Instead of the formal, reserved gathering Sarah's family had planned, it had become something warmer, more inclusive. The veterans who had attended the ceremony were welcomed not as intrusions, but as honored guests. They sat at tables with Michael's law firm colleagues, sharing stories that bridged decades and social classes. I watched Tom explaining the details of Heartbreak Ridge to a group of Sarah's college friends, their faces rapt with attention. Patricia approached me during the cocktail hour, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Frank, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you thanks." "For what?" "For showing me what real class looks like. I've spent my career in diplomatic circles, judging people by their credentials and connections. You've reminded me that character isn't something you can put on a resume." She paused, sipping her champagne. "Sarah's father would have been proud to know you were walking her down the aisle. He was a military man himself, Navy destroyer in World War II. He understood what service meant. I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you. He always said the measure of a man wasn't what he'd accomplished, but what he'd sacrificed for others." As the evening progressed, people approached me with stories I'd never heard. Neighbors who remembered me helping with emergency repairs after storms. Former co-workers who recalled my mentoring young apprentices at the aircraft factory. Michael's friends who had been influenced by lessons he'd learned from me. "Your son talks about you all the time," said David, the best man. "Every time we faced an ethical dilemma in law school, Michael would ask, 'What would my dad do?' He said you taught him that doing right was more important than getting ahead." Near the end of the reception, Sarah's grandmother, a woman in her 90s who had traveled from Boston for the wedding, asked to speak with me privately. She walked with a cane but carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Young man," she said, a twinkle in her ancient eyes, "I want to tell you something. I've been to a lot of weddings in my time. Fancy ones, expensive ones, ceremonies that cost more than most people make in a year. But I've never seen anything more beautiful than watching a hero give away a bride. Mrs. Patterson, I'm not a hero. I just... Nonsense!" She tapped her cane against the floor for emphasis. "I know heroes when I see them. My husband was one, lost his leg at Normandy. My brother was one, came home from Guadalcanal and never talked about it. Heroes are men who do what needs doing and then get on with their lives." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But the real heroism isn't what you did in Korea, son. It's what you did today, putting your children's happiness above your own recognition, then accepting that recognition gracefully when it was offered. That's the kind of heroism that builds families." As the reception wound down, Michael found me helping stack chairs in the fellowship hall. It was automatic behavior. I'd been cleaning up after church events for 20 years. "Dad, you don't need to do that. We hired people." "I know, but I like to finish what I start." He picked up a stack of chairs himself, working beside me in comfortable silence. Finally, he spoke. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Tom hadn't shown up today." "You would have had a beautiful wedding. Sarah would have been walked down the aisle by a good man who loves her. You would have started your marriage surrounded by people who care about you. But you wouldn't have been there." I paused in my work. "Michael, I want you to understand something. I would have been fine with that. Your happiness has always been more important to me than my feelings." "That's exactly the problem, Dad. Your feelings should matter. Your recognition should matter. You raised us to succeed, but somewhere along the way, we forgot to honor the man who made that success possible. Lisa joined us, still in her bridesmaid dress but helping with the cleanup, despite Sarah's mother's protests that such work was beneath. The wedding party? I keep thinking about Mom, she said quietly, about what she would have said if she'd seen us today. I smiled, remembering Mary's fierce protectiveness of family dignity. She would have been proud of you both, and she would have given you a piece of her mind about hiding your father at his own son's wedding. She would have been proud of you, too, Lisa said, for raising children who eventually figured out what really mattered. As we finished cleaning up, Sarah appeared in her going-away outfit, a simple dress that somehow made her look even more beautiful than the elaborate wedding gown. She carried a small wrapped box. "This is for you," she said, pressing it into my hands. "A wedding gift from Michael and me." Inside was a silver picture frame containing the photograph Tom had brought. The 12 young soldiers from Korea, 1951. But this wasn't the faded original. Someone had had it professionally restored, the faces clear and sharp, the uniforms crisp against the mountain background. Below the photograph was an engraved plate. Sergeant Frank Harrison, Medal of Honor recipient, and the men he brought home. Heartbreak Ridge, Korea, 1951. "We want you to put this on your mantle," Michael said. "We want our children to know who their grandfather really is." Children. The word hit me with unexpected force. Grandchildren who would grow up knowing their grandfather's story, who would understand that heroism wasn't just something from movies and history books. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. As the wedding party prepared to leave, Tom approached me one final time. "Frank, I need to ask you something. The Medal of Honor ceremony, the President wants to reschedule it. Full honors at the White House. Will you accept?" I looked around the fellowship hall at the remnants of the celebration, at my children, who had finally learned to see me clearly, at Sarah, who had chosen to honor an old soldier instead of social convention, at the veterans who had traveled far to witness this moment. "Yes," I said simply, "I'll accept." "Good man." Tom shook my hand with military firmness. "The ceremony is scheduled for next month. Your family is invited, of course." I nodded, then had a thought. "Tom, can I ask a favor?" "Anything." "When they do the ceremony, when they read the citation, make sure they mention the other men, the ones who stayed behind with me, the ones who didn't make it home." Tom's smile was gentle, understanding. "Frank, that's already in the citation. Heroes don't forget their brothers." As the evening ended and everyone prepared to leave, I found myself alone in the fellowship hall for a moment. The decorations were down, the tables cleared, the celebration reduced to memory, but something fundamental had changed. I thought about the morning when I'd stood in my bedroom looking at a man my children were ashamed to claim. Now, 12 hours later, I wore the nation's highest military honor and had walked my daughter-in-law down the aisle while an entire congregation rose to honor my presence. The change wasn't in the medal or the recognition. The change was in the truth being finally spoken aloud. I was the same man I'd been that morning, a factory worker, a widower, a father who told the same old stories. But now, my family knew the rest of the story. Now they understood that ordinary men could do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. Michael appeared beside me, still in his tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone. "Dad, you ready to go home?" Home, to the house where I'd raised him, where Mary and I had built our life together, where I'd spent the morning being made to feel unwelcome at my own son's wedding. "Yes," I said, adjusting the medal one final time. "I'm ready to go home." As we walked out of the church together, I realized this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. Tomorrow, my grandchildren would be born into a family that understood the difference between shame and pride, between appearance and character, between hiding from the past and honoring it. They would grow up knowing their grandfather's story, all of it, and they would never have to wonder if they were worthy of respect, because they would know where they came from.